Alex, what's another big takeaway, thought, intriguing development that you saw through the first couple days?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to something Mike said, talking about Justin Jefferson's size and confusing him with Xavier Brown. There's a reason for that. Xavier Brown is huge.
Big.
Like these,
all three of them are, man. All three of the 5-star DBs, big dudes.
That is the thing that stood out most to me, is that I don't think they missed a single workout and probably were in there every other day because they look physically ready. And that's the thing. The more you talk to people too, and it might just be lip service, but you hear they're putting in the work to also be mentally ready on top of it. Talked to Maurice Linguist about Xavier Brown and just raved about the time he's put in terms of learning the defense and putting himself in a position to where even at 8A he was able to be part of that first team defense. And then we heard from Kane Womack talking about Jalen Mbakwe and just raving about how he had probably the best offseason of any of those DBs. So the more you look at them, the more you hear from people, the more you're thinking, okay, this is real. Like, it may not just be one of these guys who's playing this year as Xavier Brown. We might see an Mbakwe. We might see a Mincy. We might see a Red Morgan, too, if you want to broaden it out to that Husky position as well, because all of those guys look the part. They look ready. Now, we all know that they call them freshmen for a reason. They're going to take their lumps, but especially when you consider the looseness of the depth chart in terms of not having any production really returning, there's reason to think right now that those guys are going to play a lot of football this year.
And the learning curve as a freshman going from Mater Dei to Alabama is about as small as a learning curve as you can find. I mean, IMG is probably the only other comparable. So, Xavier Brown's played at a very high level of high school football. He replaced Damani Jackson on the field at Mater Dei when Damani got hurt. He knows him well. There's, I think, chemistry there. So, again, if you're asking me who's starting day one, I think those are your two starters at corner.
Yeah, and it's, you combine kind of the praise we're hearing with the freshmen to, we've asked about Deshaun Jones, the Wake Forest transfer, who, started 10 games ACC last year. So like, he's a player with experience, but he's also a dude that just has college football snaps. And that seems to be the only thing we're hearing about him. And then you hear the praise about Xavier Brown specifically. And you mentioned Kane Womack's comments about Mbakwe. It seems more and more like these freshmen, one of them may go immediately. Like, I'm not saying Xavier Brown could be the day one starter, but if he is, at this point, I don't know that I would be very surprised just based on everything we've heard.
If it was today, I think Xavier Brown would be the starter. The question is, Kane Womack did talk about Deshaun Jones and the physical improvement he's made. And you can go look at photos of him at Wake Forest last season versus what we saw the last few days. And it's noticeable. Like, he's added some bulk. He looks like he's an SEC defensive back. You just don't know if, again, is he down on the depth chart because he's new and he's learning everything, and how quick will it be before he's up to speed? And if at that point, can he even catch Xavier Brown? Because there's also an argument to be made that if Xavier Brown's the future and he has the highest upside, just throw him out there and see what happens. So it is very much worth watching. That said, they're going to play a lot of cornerbacks no matter what. It's by virtue of who they have and the offenses that they're going to play. We're going to see all these guys. It's just a matter of who's the quote-unquote starter.
Right. And I think with Deshaun Jones, too, I mean, I directly asked Kalen DeBoer on Wednesday about it and about his experience, particularly. Like, he's started at Wake Forest, as we talked about. And DeBoer said, I mean, he's taken some snaps at the college football level, so we need him out there. I think there's a confidence about him because of that. We need in our program always all these guys. Cool thing is they all respect each other and just pushing each other to learn every single. It wasn't the strongest endorsement of Deshaun Jones.
It wasn't Keon Sabb day one. He has the it factor.
Right.
It was not that.
Right. And you pair that with Womack talking about how he needed to change his body. Like, you just don't get the sense that Deshaun Jones comes from Wake Forest, steps in right away as a starter. I mean, it could happen over time that he develops into that over fall camp and shows that he's the best guy for the job. But just reading the tea leaves there and, try not to make too many assumptions, but there's a direct question about Deshaun Jones. And I think you can pick up on some things sometimes what people don't say.
Yeah. Well, and to, not to make a comparison to last year, but to looking at the situation last year when you had Kool-Aid and Terrion and Trey Amos, who had a similar lot of starting experience at maybe, what some might view as a lesser school, he was great in that CB3 role. Like, he would come off the bench when needed. He would make a few plays. Like, he obviously knew that as soon as he stepped on the field, he was going to be tested because he wasn't Kool-Aid and Terrion. And he came through more often than not. And maybe that's just where Jones is going to be at. Like, obviously, if Brown is the starter from day one, he's going to get tested right away pretty frequently, especially given who Alabama plays the first 3 weeks of the season. So, you get to a point where maybe Brown settles in a little bit. And then if there's an injury or something freak happens and Jones has to come off first because he's got that experience, can he step in and make the play? We saw Trey Amos do that last year. That could be Jones's role this year. And I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. You want guys with experience down the bench, right? Especially, that's going to be crucial when it comes to SEC play, just the wear and tear that these guys are going to, experience. Like, you need that. You need that.
Yeah.
Or it could be in Mbakwe.
Xavier Brown, you got to expect he's going to take some lumps and there's going to be some ups and downs. So if he has to come off the field and get his head right, if it's a 1A, 1B at that position, I think that's a good thing to have. At the very least, you've got quality depth, which is something that 6 months ago we were looking at going, oh no, this is not going to be good.
Right. I think that the interesting thing about Mbakwe, who Womack raved about, and I know that we're all pretty excited about, and like, I watched him a few different games at Clay Chalkville last year when he was a senior, basically doing everything for that team. He seems like he is growing into that CB3 role, but I'm also curious, there are other ways to get these guys on the field, right? Like, I think Zay Mincy could be a prime candidate for that Husky role because he's 6'3", he's closing in on like 185, 190. Like, he could eventually grow into a safety. So maybe that Husky role could be an opportunity. Him, Red Morgan, Bray Hubbard, however that, Devonta Smith, however they decide to sort that out. Could he see some snaps there? A guy like Mbakwe, I could honestly see, like, if he's not a starter at cornerback, I could see him being on the return teams, right? Like, I don't know that there's a definitive who's the kick and punt returner now. That could be an opportunity for him to get on the field, experience the speed, help him ease into it so that when he does step in at corner, he's a little bit more comfortable. So the way Kane was talking about him, I think that could potentially be an option for him. That's something we haven't asked about yet. I think when they asked about it in the spring, DeBoer's like, yeah, we're just not really worried about that at this point in time. But as we get closer to the season, that question will pop up. He could be an option there. I don't know if the coaches view him that way, but I know he's got experience doing that, granted at the high school level, but something to keep in mind.
There's a lot of peeking ahead to 2025 and figuring out where Huskies and safeties fit. It's going to be really interesting, especially considering the additions of King Mack and Cam Howard, and how that complicates it, I think, in a good way. But that's a problem for another podcast.
Yeah, no doubt. But yeah, to tie a bow on that one specifically, the freshmen look good. They look the part, but they also, through the drills that we were able to see, I was impressed.